Hey Leo, how's it going? I got some oracle messages for you. I pulled a few signs from my own divination system and an I Ching hexagram for you. So I have this feeling that you might be restraining and restricting yourself a little too excessively. I got the I Ching hexagram of restricting with the changing line, the sixth line. So restricting changes to innermost sincerity. So this is an idea of restricting yourself, and perhaps a little too stubbornly or excessively, overdoing something in some way. Now, oftentimes when we want to try and break ourselves of bad habits, we restrict our behavior, and it can be good to be like ruthless with ourselves sometimes when we want to break a bad habit. But not to the point that we become repressed or frustrated, or that it affects our ability to go through our day-to-day life, right? If we have a habit that we really, really want to break and we feel it's very important to do it quickly, we have to balance that desire to quickly break a habit with our ability to live effectively and comfortably and have a clear mind and make sure that this self-discipline we're doing doesn't affect those around us, that it doesn't affect the way we manage our daily lives, the way we manage the resources around us. Oftentimes, if we're responsible for other people, sometimes we find ourselves we're responsible for other people's money or other people's well-being and stuff like that. You know, we all have, many of us have families and associates and stuff like that, that we become responsible for others, caretakers and custodians of resources. And when we're in a self-disciplinarian stage or episode, we have to make sure that we manage these resources well, that our lives in society with our social group and these people that we're responsible for are not affected negatively. But I think you're going to manage that because there's a sort of rebirth occurring within you, a kind of baptism, a sort of purification going on here. And it's a very high level spiritual sort of purification. The symbols I got for you from my divination system are the baptism, the open palm, and the king. And here we have a very Christian motif, if that's your vibe. You know, the king, right? Very symbolic of deity and Jesus. The open palm, of course, to turn the other cheek. There's many paintings and depictions of an iconography of Jesus with his palms outstretched, his hands sort of down by his waist, with his palms facing the viewer in this sort of merciful gesture of the open palm. And the baptism, of course, that sort of dove descending from heaven to spiritually purify a person. And we can, we need to make sure that there's a purpose for this baptism, right? That it's not just for the sake of appearances, you know, that there's really going to be something that comes from it that's going to be good for you and others, but for you. We do spiritual things mostly for ourselves, at least to begin, and then they benefit others because of course they do. I'm not recommending you be selfish, but accept the fact that you need to take care of yourself and look after yourself and be gentle with yourself, and that the things you do for yourself, especially psychologically and spiritually, should serve you well before they serve others. You kind of need to fill your own cup until it overflows, and then you can fill others' cups. There's that idea that I think you're learning, because here the I Ching hexagram has the two symbols of water above lake, and this symbolizes like the management of resources. Protect against flooding and excessive water accumulation. Make sure it has somewhere to go, irrigate some fields with it, or add to the reservoir if it's deficient, if it's a drought. Make sure if you dam it up, you have a plan for why you're damming it up, and make sure you're not going to damage people's property or whatever. This is all metaphorical for making sure that the spiritual energy you're accumulating now has a real purpose that's going to benefit you. It's going to benefit you psychologically, spiritually, physically, and that you're not just building it up and building it up and building it up. Like sometimes we practice maybe pranayama or a yogic technique or some hermetic technique where we accumulate spiritual energy within ourselves because it feels good, it can alter our state of consciousness and things like that. And we kind of just get addicted to that, to the whole, being blissed out thing where we just keep accumulating. And there's no real reason for it other than to sort of quiet all of the other emotions besides bliss and happiness. We just want to feel the bliss and happiness. And then we become less effective in the world because our other emotions have purposes that make us effective in society and in our lives. And if we're just blissed out all the time, we can become careless, especially if we're responsible with like some mundane things, finances and so on. People can become careless when they're in an elated state of consciousness caused by the accumulation of spiritual or etheric energies. So perhaps that's the type of restriction you're feeling, where you're accumulating a lot and not letting it back out into the universe, not letting it like expel from yourself. Or you're restricting your use of it because you're afraid of what might happen if you let it go. Now, this might not be for all of you. There is another interpretation to all of this for like a second group that might be watching, is that these restrictions are being placed upon you at this time so that you can focus on spirituality, that perhaps there's too much going on in your life and you need to restrict what you're doing. So it's sort of the opposite interpretation, where you need to kind of trim the fat and cut certain things out and focus more in on building up what is deficient within you, building up some sort of spiritual energy or psychological something or other that is deficient. So if you feel like there's an excess of it, you have to do stuff in society. If you feel like you're doing too much in society and your spirituality and peace of mind is deficient, then you have to take time to do it. So those are the two possible interpretations for this. So there could be two groups of people watching that kind of need to take the opposite view of each other. But I'm going to pull some cards on this baptism, open palm, and the king. So first, let's see what this baptism is about. Of course, I lean toward the occult and the spiritual, but there are more mundane and practical interpretations of all these. A baptism could just be like a relief from something, a removing of an obstruction in your life, removal of an obstacle, change of perspective about something, a chance encounter with like a really nice person. The hanged man wants to peek out. Change of perspective. Perspective is maybe a closer interpretation here. What is this? So we have the Princess of Cups, or the Page of Cups in other decks. She has like a little turtle in a cup there. So there could be a new feeling that you're developing, which is a good. It needs to be developed, and it's rooted in like an intelligence. This sort of, how dolphins are like really smart, almost like people, or perhaps as intelligent as people, and yet they live in the water. They don't have a complex language. They live a simpler life, even though they're arguably just as intelligent as anyone else. And there's a peacefulness in that. There's a restricting of communication, and in restricting communication, restricting our language and how complex our language is, and simplifying our communication, it can actually expand communication, ironically enough. In restricting it, we begin communicating in other ways, maybe through body language, maybe psychically and energetically, and in other ways like that, where we restrict one form of communication to expand a form of emotional communication or psychic communication. And that might be something worth pursuing, is how can I purify and change the way I feel when I communicate? So if Like, let's say you get exhausted when talking with people. Well, maybe there's something you can change within yourself so that you protect that energy and don't feel exhausted or drained when you have to engage with people. There could be something that you're learning in that regard. And taking things more slowly, letting your emotions sit instead of trying to forcibly change your states of emotions, but let them move at a turtle's pace to wherever it is they're going. And in doing so, you can alter the communication habits of yourself and those around you, and you can begin communicating with people differently, and they will begin communicating with you differently. Like, a more solid yet quiet communication skill might be very useful for you right now. So what about this open palm? The open palm is sort of like gracefulness and mercifulness. That's sort of turning the other cheek energy, or just an open-heartedness, no prejudice, open-mindedness, softness and gentleness. Let's see here, what is that? The Eight of Swords, or shortened force. So that could be part of the restriction here that you've been imposing on yourself, is like perhaps trying to be very, very graceful with people and less maybe argumentative or combative or whatever. Really trying to restrain yourself in how you interact. But doing that too much, you begin to hide yourself from others, and that won't help solve the issues. If there's social issues or interpersonal issues of any kind, restraining yourself too much results in people not even being aware that you're restraining yourself from something. They're not even aware that there's a problem within you, and they will continue to do the things that you disapprove of with you that affect you negatively, when being less restrained would communicate this problem with them, and they would realize, oh, I'm doing something I shouldn't be that's really bothering this person. I had no idea. I will alter my behavior now. So perhaps don't restrain yourself too much, like, biting your tongue, biting the inside of your cheek or whatever. Like, let something out. Let it be known there's something wrong. Let it be known that there's a problem that has to be solved. You can restrain yourself to an extent so that there's no, so you don't make a scene, so that you don't make the problem worse. But don't hide away the problem here. That's overdoing it, and that's not going to help. That's really what this I Ching hexagram is about. With innermost sincerity, is like, don't excessively restrict or restrain yourself. Do so just enough to where your behavior is acceptable and smooth, and there's smoothness in the situation around you, but communication needs to be open. And I think you'll be really good at discovering that perfect communication technique that is graceful and open, but also really effectively addresses the problem. All right, the King. What have we got for the King? Who or what is that? The King is that divine masculine energy. And it definitely doesn't like being restricted. It likes to hand out restrictions and doesn't like to be too much restricted. And excessive restrictions should not become commonplace, even if they're, restrictions are useful, especially with large groups of people. We need law and restraint and restrictions so that people behave well. So there could be something with, like, you might be in a leadership position here that has to deal with a group of people. And, when we deal with very small numbers of people and we know them and trust them, they generally can just get along well if that's the vibe. And you don't really need to lay down the law or anything like that. But the larger and larger a group becomes, now you need to start getting rid of some democratic beliefs and start just imposing restrictions. And this actually increases effectiveness, efficiency, harmony, smoothness in the group. People know what they can and cannot do and how to behave, and there's no misunderstanding, and people feel generally safer. So as a leader, it's important to know how to do that and to know how to do it intuitively. Here we have the High Priestess. Is to know how to develop law in, I don't want to say in secret, but a lot of the reasoning for law and legal system is obscure and not exactly open. And if you have the authority, you know, a lot of people will make laws. No one will know why. They'll enact the law. No one will really understand the reasoning, but it gets enacted anyway. And oftentimes in like a healthy and traditional working relationship where people are like, you know, sane and they share a goal and all of that, there's no real social dissonance, then these laws that sort of come from one person or a small group of people sort of secretively are okay. Like the reasoning doesn't need to be known because it works. And a little bit of mystery in the legal system can be acceptable in certain circumstances. And perhaps you don't really need or want to explain yourself or the reasoning behind some of your decisions, and you have that right at this time to be a little mysterious with how you restrict yourself, with how you might be imposing restrictions on this group, but do it with, like, you know, this gracefulness, this from a center of this is good for all of us. We'll experiment with this. This is also sort of a sign of like psychological experimentation, this card. We'll see what works and what doesn't, you know, but you'll have the responsibility of observing the results and how this change works, this change in communication that you might be looking at, this change in restriction that you might be looking at, this addressing of a problem that you might be looking at. If you do this like intuitively and somewhat secretively, and you have the authority to just do this, you have a lot of responsibility now to tweak it when it needs to be tweaked, pay attention to everyone and everything, make sure it's working positively and not working negatively. If it's working negatively, change it a little bit here and there. You have to really manage it, and it's like creating an artificial river or a canal that you have to really pay attention to the terrain, and you have to make this turn over there and that curve over here. You have to dredge this spot a little bit deeper than that spot, and you have to keep all the water level at the same height, and like all that sort of stuff is going to be your responsibility. So it's a lot to consider, but I think you have the mind for it. I don't think there's any issue in your ability to do this. I don't see anything that indicates that, except for you being a little too severe with yourself. You might need to just be a little more lenient with yourself at this time. So I'm going to pull one last thing for you, Leo. Round this all out. What does Leo need to know? And you also have to trust. Trust yourself, trust each other. We got the horse here. The horse is a sign of trust. So really trusting in your ability to do this. Maybe you were given some type of authority and you're in this sort of reawakening state, or this, you're in this state where you feel like you have to purify something about yourself or change something about yourself, and then you're given this responsibility, or you have this responsibility, and someone trusts you with it, and you might not feel ready for it, but I think you are ready for it. In fact, for things like this, for important things, we really never feel ready. We just have to accept our duty and do it. And we will realize that we in fact are ready. And you will begin to trust yourself as soon as you get up on that horse and start making these decisions. You'll find, okay, I can do this. The problems are starting to get smoothed out. This group of people are okay with what's going on. There's no real resistance here. They seem to trust me. So as long as you're paying attention to the effects of what it is you're doing, paying attention to the people's needs around you, and the fact that they trust you, you can kind of wing it. I mean, it's not really winging it, because you are paying careful attention to what you're doing and the effects it's having, and you'll have a plan to do it, but that plan will be like one step at a time. Like you take one step and then plan one step ahead, and then plan one step ahead. So you have careful planning, but it'll be like really short-term planning. Like you'll have to keep sort of reassessing each step and then planning the next step there. So you won't be able to have like a really long-term plan. You'll just keep making really short-term plans and until you get the hang of it and see what's going on. And that can be a lot of fun a lot of the times, where you're sort of, you're still being careful and deliberate and planning things for the future, but just a very short time in the future, just a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And you can develop all sorts of interesting planning techniques and assessment techniques. As you move forward, you assess and then take a small step forward and then reassess, take a small step forward and reassess. And we do that a lot in teaching. I'm an English teacher. I teach English as a foreign language, and I'm constantly assessing my student. And we have lessons that are an hour long, pretty short, and I have to constantly be like planning and assessing and planning and assessing, and it's like very short-term stuff. And I'm constantly learning how best to proceed, how best to plan, how I can change plans, how I can change my planning tactics. And I find a lot of joy in that, in constantly assessing and planning. So it feels like improvisation, also with deliberate organization. It's a really nice balance between left and right brain of improv and intuition with deliberation and foresight. And striking that balance can be very, very fulfilling and stimulating and help you learn very, very rapidly. So Leo, I think that's all the Oracle and I have for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I always appreciate you stopping by. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time.